Welcome to the webinar. We'll get started shortly. Before we begin, here's how to earn CPE credit. Unlike traditional CPE webinars, there are no polling questions or attendance checks during the presentation. Instead, you will demonstrate your knowledge by taking a brief multiple-choice quiz in the Earmark app. Search for the free Earmark app from the App Store or Google Play Store, or scan the QR code on the screen. Open the app and create an account. Be sure to use a valid email address because we'll email you your CPE certificates. From the home screen, scroll down to find the course. You can also tap the magnifying glass icon to search for the course. Tap on the course artwork, then the Enroll button. On the Course tab, you'll find the recording and quiz questions. If you don't see the quiz yet, don't worry. We'll email you when the quiz is available. Complete the quiz to earn your CPE certificate. If you have questions or need help, email us anytime at support@earmarkcpe.com. Now, on to the webinar.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to the do's and don'ts of switching payroll providers with Valerie Heckman, and this is presented by OnPay. So if anyone's having any issues or technical problems, please write to me in the comments section. Other than that, I'm going to hand this over to Valerie to take this away.
Thank you, Zach. Does your payroll need a remodel? Last week in Blake Oliver's webinar on apps to use in your accounting firm, he talks about how the technology that you use in your practice becomes your office. After all, it's where you and your team and your clients interact and collaborate and get your work done. It's also how your clients oftentimes are experiencing working with you. So if someone involved wants to make a change to something like payroll software, it's a lot like doing a remodeling project. And if you've ever done a remodeling project, you know that it can be a little intimidating and a little demanding, but it's almost always worth it in the end. With the right preparation and partnership, it also doesn't have to be a super painful experience. You don't want you or your clients to have a virtual office that doesn't serve you or is outdated or broken down. But you also don't want to start swinging sledgehammers around until you have some of the details figured out. Much like a remodeling project, switching payroll providers involves first navigating the options to make decisions. Second, planning ahead to ensure that you have the information that you need and the timelines for change. And thirdly, strong communication around everyone involved, your payroll provider, your team, your clients, and importantly, their employees. That's what we're here to talk about today, the do's and don'ts of these three areas, and I hope you brought your hard hat. For those who don't know me, I'm Valerie Heckman. I'm our accountant community manager here at OnPay, and I've spent the last decade or so helping accounting firms navigate changes to their software, their technology, whether it's payroll, accounting, or even sales tax. I've worked with firms of all sizes, from the top 100 to solo firmpreneurs and bookkeepers, to help make these changes. And I have to say that this is an area that a lot of folks really struggle with, especially when it comes to payroll. So I'm excited to share some great information and tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way. And my goal here today is to help you be more confident the next time you enter a payroll switch. I do want to give the disclaimer that yes, this webinar is brought to you by OnPay, and I work for OnPay. If you're not familiar with us, we are a full service payroll, HR, and benefits software. I'm on our partner team. We have a whole partner program that is built for accountants and bookkeepers to help you serve your small business clients with payroll, whether you're doing payroll for them, with them, or you just want an option to refer clients to. I'll be using OnPay as an example as we're going through today here and there, but I did try and make the content very general, regardless of which payroll provider you might be switching to. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about OnPay, I'll be sharing some contact information for me and our webinar. Let's start with figuring out the right fit. The biggest hurdle for switching payroll providers may very well be that initial leap, making a choice and seeing that decision through. Imagine that you have a small business client who is feeling like they're in a bit of a broken house when it comes to payroll. They have issues in their current process. Maybe they're running into some issues with the support they're receiving, and they decide to look elsewhere. They might Google payroll software options or payroll service providers or something like that and be met with a whole lot of options. Chances are they will feel like it's if they're looking at home remodeling options and they have every type of flooring out there showing up at them. They're probably unsure how the options that they're seeing differ from what they already have, and chances are they can use your help. You may be surprised to learn that 40 to 60% of software sales end with no decision. People tend to just stick to the old current way of doing it. That is according to sales experts Ted McKenna and Matthew Dixon. They wrote the book Jolt in 2022 and did a lot of research around this. Think of how many of your clients might be dealing with payroll issues today and letting it continue week in and week out just because of indecision. When it comes to purchase processes, especially for business, people are often less concerned about missing out and more concerned about messing up. And with payroll, I think that pull is even stronger, right? No one wants to make a decision around change that can impact people's paychecks and people's livelihoods. So I recommend that the first do today is to be a guide. Be a guide for your clients through this switch. Or if it's not going to be you, assign somebody on your team to take the lead as that guide. Keep in mind that the realization that a client might need to switch is just the start of the process. I recommend having a discovery conversation about your client's challenges and perspectives around change. If you don't know the full history of what they've been doing with software in their business, it can be really helpful to ask, hey, have you been through a switch like this before? How did it go? What went well? What didn't? So that you can start to understand their experiences. Are you keeping profiles around what your clients are using? Not just the software they're using, but what forms they might be filing, what benefits platforms they might have, other tools maybe related to time tracking. If you're not keeping track of those things, that's something that I've seen work really well in firms, not just for payroll, but all software that they might end up making technology changes around. It can be really helpful to try and capture that somewhere. And I've seen firms build out like complete CRMs or just keep some spreadsheets or lists somewhere that kind of catch all of those details as you're having conversations with your clients so that you know a little bit more about what they have going on when you start talking about something like this kind of switch. But if not, that's something that you'd want to talk about now. And of course, I'm kind of talking about if the client is doing payroll themselves, but in some cases, you might be doing the payroll. And this is a conversation you need to have with your team about what you're doing in your firm to serve those clients. After all, you might have the compliance and feature pieces figured out, but you might not have had a conversation yet around some of the concerns that someone might have around switching, those fears and anxieties that your client or your team might not always tell you. When I think about switching software, I always think about this progress-making forces diagram. This is something that I've seen show up in a lot of different sales books and books around software and product development. If you're not familiar with it, it's really around the forces that drive adoption and what's going to push and pull folks to a new solution and what is going to push and pull, bringing them back through inertia and anxiety to the old way of doing it. And I know you probably don't consider yourself a person who sells payroll, or maybe you do. But if you don't, I would argue that if you are involved in helping somebody commit to making a software switch and seeing that process through, you're involved in sales a little bit. And selling is hard, but buying is also hard. Making that leap into something new is really hard. And many folks, when they're talking about making a switch to payroll, they just focus on those things that are going to draw you to the new way. But you definitely don't want to leave out the things that might pull someone back to their old solution, right? There's behaviors and anxieties that lead us back to that comfortable way or make us afraid to move forward. So definitely think about how you can help your clients overcome some of those hurdles through a change. My next do is do familiar yourself with the options on the market. I love finding ways of standardizing the solutions that you use and minimizing app fatigue in your firm. But sometimes being too aggressive about one solution and one solution only can make your clients feel like they don't have a lot of options or their needs are unmet, especially if they're going to be the one interacting in the software. People tend to like having some choices to make sure that they get something that fits them best. And of course, like we talked about, there are a ton of options on the market when it comes to payroll, and they all have their nuances. These are a few of the categories that I think about when it comes to looking at the payroll market and comparing options to figure out where things differ and help guide your clients through that process. You might want to think about service delivery in terms of there's some manual software options where your client might have to do a lot of the work. There are the full service options like OnPay, where you or your client might go in and run payroll, and then OnPay will handle the tax payments and form filings, corrections that are needed, that kind of thing. And then there might be enterprise solutions on the market that are really full featured, but may involve a lot more to implement and may be more difficult to use. If you are talking about the ease of use, that can be very important to think about whether it is your clients or your team that are going to be using the product. So if you're evaluating the options on the market, definitely be mindful of what that experience is like. Think about what support will be like. Is it accessible to your clients if they need it? Is there a team that's going to be available to support you as an accountant a bit differently than they support small businesses? That's something that we do at OnPay. We have a dedicated partner team. And you want to know what to expect if mistakes come up, because the reality is we're talking about human beings and how they're going out into the world and working. And there might be some corrections that need to be made along the way, especially if people get their time cards wrong and stuff like that. So knowing what you can expect if there are challenges is important as you're assessing the market. When it comes to features, we could probably talk about that all afternoon, but my biggest advice is to be mindful of any industry specific needs that your client may have, any compliance related needs that you've seen come up in their states. This is one of the reasons that I recommend figuring out a way to document what your clients are using and what forms they're filing and all those things ahead of time, so that you can make the conversation more about their experience and know, what are the must-haves to stay compliant. That can really make it easier for you to also assess different software across your whole client base as opposed to going one client at a time. If you have a place where you've collected that information and you can segment your clients to sort it out. So you might want to also think about, hey, maybe we have a primary solution and then another solution for the clients that may need a little something different because of their industry or because of a specific type of functionality that they're looking for or whatever it is. Don't forget the integrations that your clients might have in place already. You'll want to make sure that that's something that's going to continue working, or that you at least have a workflow around how you're going to do that going forward. And then finally, pricing might be obvious here, But I would be mindful of anything around additional fees that might be charged for certain things, say multi-state filings or having multiple pay runs in 1 month. Is there a difference between how the fees work for employees versus contractors? Additional fees for corrections or anything like that. So good questions to ask as you are assessing solutions. And once you've kind of gathered all of this yourself and sort of know, hey, these are the solutions that we feel confident in talking about to clients, make sure that this conversation around the market landscape is a conversation and not a lecture. You'll want to learn what your clients are thinking and feeling along the way so that they can be confident in the decision. And don't forget about the worker experience. As you're talking about switching solutions or assessing solutions, keep in mind that the employee is a big part of what this is going to look like in the end. After all, the decisions you make are going to impact these people who are paid. Just like when we talked about that remodel of the audit office impacting you and your clients' workers are experiencing their business through these tools as well. And friction can really damage that relationship between your client, the business owner, and their employees and contractors. But improvements can certainly strengthen that relationship, especially if they're getting new visibility that they didn't have before, or they're getting paid faster, or whatever it might be. So definitely look into, hey, if we're switching solutions, how are the employees going to be paid? How do they look at their paychecks? What are they experiencing when it comes to looking at their paycheck history? I didn't put it on here, but things like requesting time off, if there's a time tracking element to what you're doing, and being able to access W-2s and 1099s at the end of the year, you want to be mindful of what that experience is going to be like for the worker. All right, I'm going to pause here to see if we have any questions or comments. Good to see some of you here. Thank you. I'm mostly getting people saying hi so far. That's awesome. Thanks so much. Okay, let's move on to talking about the plan ahead for a switch. Do you ever get texts from friends that say something like, hey, can I ask you a payroll question? I recently got one from my friend Dave when his company was switching payroll providers on January 1st and decided to tell him and his colleagues on December 23rd. So there he is, the day before Christmas vacation, and he's just about to log off a little early to get some last minute shopping done. And he gets this email from his HR team that's like, we urgently need you to log into this new tool and enter your direct deposit info or you won't get paid on time. And it was this super scary, intimidating email. And it mentioned that they would be paid by paper check. And it piled on telling them that their pay date was changing in the new year. So they were going to be paid a different day when they got back from this like Christmas and New Year's period. Needless to say, the employees were very upset because they didn't even know that a switch was being made. If we think about our remodel, this is kind of worse than finding out that you don't have running water when you're about to take a shower or do a little laundry. You want to be aware of what's going on. In their case, they didn't even know that the place was getting remodeled. But even if you do, you want to know what that process is going to look like along the way. So I will start off with first, consider the timing of the switch. The timing of the payroll switch can be difficult because you do have the payroll tax calendar weighing in. And for those who don't know about this or may need a refresher, payroll aligns with the calendar year and is broken into quarterly and annual filings. But most tax payments are paid monthly, although some might be more frequent or less frequent. Kind of depends on what's assigned by at the federal level or at the state level or how your state taxes work. It gets really tricky, right? Because we're working with federal, state, and even local taxes in some cases. So many feel that January 1st is absolutely hands down the best time to make a switch because you can draw a line in the sand. You close out the previous year's payroll, you do all the year-end form filings, the employees get their W-2s, the contractors get their 1099s, and that's that on that old payroll provider. And now we can start fresh with the new, which is great, except for when you run into situations like my friend where their business was just not really ready to do a switch like that time of year. And they completely forgot to communicate to employees and had this big last minute scramble. So definitely there's some pros to switching at the beginning of the year, but there can be some cons as well because a lot of industries are really busy at year end and there's holidays and all those types of things to consider. So I know there's never quite a good time, but that can sometimes be a little bit hectic. During the year, of course, there are more options when it comes to the start date, the data migration, the communication along the way. Most will recommend making a change at the end of a quarter because then you don't run the risk of having like duplicate filings or duplicate tax payments. It at least mitigates any of those types of concerns. But that's something to keep in mind. Now, the cons of switching during the year is there is more data migration. We do have to consider the payroll history because you're only going to be able to issue W-2s out of one system. You're going to have one W-2 for each employee. So any payroll that happened in the old system, that data has to be in the new system. Same goes with the tax payments and form filings. We got to know what happened in the old system when you go into something new. And of course, all of that means reconciliation in the books requires a little bit of extra attention, as well as all these kind of making sure that you have the right data collected as you're switching. I also would recommend when you are going through the timing of a switch, thinking about the timelines and availability of everyone involved. So yes, holidays and PTO and those types of things are a kind of extreme example, but even on a quote unquote normal week, you want to think about, hey, okay, what are the logistics of the payroll provider themselves? So for example, at OnPay, we do all of the prior payroll entry for you. All the prior payroll history gets entered on your behalf, as well as the setup of your employees. But of course, you would want to talk to us about what's the timeline of that? How soon can that be set up? You're also going to want to think about anything related to the direct deposit setup if the employees and contractors are going to be paid that way. Are there extra steps? Is there information that you're going to need? We, of course, want to keep everything really secure. So we've got processes in place to make sure that there's not going to be any fraudulent transactions taking place. So you just want to know what the timeline is going to be like to get that all going. And then, of course, when is realistically the first day that payroll can be run? When it comes to your team, be really realistic about the firm's availability to complete tasks, to answer questions, to get access and pull any reports that might be needed to successfully set up the company, the employees, and of course that pay history. And then even if you're going to be doing the payroll for your client and they aren't going to necessarily be in the system, chances are that you're going to need their involvement a bit and their participation in planning out this timing. If there's any information that you're going to need from them about their company, about their employees and contractors to get set up. Of course, if they are currently running payroll in a different system and maybe you are not involved, you'll want to know when they're going to stop doing that and what that window is like so that we can make sure the employees get paid on time. And then chances are, if you're using direct deposit, the employees might need to go in and enter in their banking information. I think most companies have the employees enter that themselves to keep everything super secure. And then employees might need to complete some other pieces of their profile as well, depending on what your provider requires. So definitely consider the timing of all of those things and all these people involved. I don't want to scare you into thinking it's going to take forever to make this kind of switch, but definitely be mindful of all those moving parts. It typically is very difficult to just flip a switch and change payroll providers overnight as much as we would like to be able to do that. So just kind of think that through as you're going along. The next thing is do know what information you need. This looks like a lot on the page, but if you are switching from another provider, this stuff should be captured somewhere for you, and hopefully you'll be able to easily get that out or give someone access to it. Work with your provider to see what's the easiest way to get information from them. At OnPay, we have a 7-step process to get the right information for the business, and then we handle the rest of the setup, as I mentioned. If you're starting January 1st, this is typically the information at the company level, as well as the employees and direct deposit setup. Some companies won't do that kind of setup for you. It's a little bit more hands-on. Some, if they're going to do anything with the employee setup or the pay history, you've got to be on a higher tier of service or pay extra implementation charges. So be mindful of that as you're assessing your options as well. And then there are often some different workflows to get that data to your provider. So you're going to want to know that. When it comes to starting during the year, right? Say we were going to do this and start running payroll in April, maybe close out March in the old provider and start in April. In that case, we would want the information for what happened in the first quarter, like a summary to date, right, of all the year-to-date payroll that's happened in January through March. And then if you do, say, run like one check in April, that's for the next quarter, and we're going to want the details of that pay run, right? So all the details of the wages and the tax withholding and anything else that's calculated, like deductions and contributions. And then also, of course, any tax filings that took place, any tax payments that have been made, you want to make sure we consider and we get everything in there. And then for my don't, so those were 2 do's. Our don't is don't overlook some of these common omissions. And this, again, kind of looks like a long list, but hopefully not all of these would ever apply in one scenario. Definitely make sure that you're considering any wages for former employees. We see that a lot. People inactivate somebody that maybe only worked there a couple of weeks or a couple months, and then later on in the year, they forget to include them in the reports. So make sure you're not, if you're exporting reports and stuff out of an old system, that you're catching all of the employees. Why? Because we need them on the W-2s if they're employees, contractors for the 1099s. And that also will make it easier to reconcile your tax payments. You want to make sure you have all the people included. Any additional work sites or remote locations. So when you're setting up employee profiles, knowing who is working where so that all the tax withholding is correct. This is something that comes up often. If your client didn't pay their taxes in the prior quarters with their old provider, they didn't do the filings, you'll have to find out. Maybe your provider will handle that for you. Maybe they won't. It's a question to ask. That might be something that your clients need you to help them with. Maybe they need to go into state websites and make some payments, do some filings, but whatever the case may be, that is something to not get surprised by. Setting up contractors that need to be paid. So often we think, okay, we know that there's a pay run for these employees. They got to get in there and give their direct deposit information, but maybe the contractors aren't paid on that particular pay run and they get forgotten, and then it's a scramble to pay them later. So keep that in mind if you've got your contractors on a different pay schedule. This time of year, we get a lot of people, hey, we've got a different state unemployment rate for 2024. If you're doing switches this time of year, make sure that you've got those things considered. It'll just make everything easier going forward. Getting the reporting agent authorization signed. So that is Form 8655. The business owner has to sign off on that for the taxes to be paid by a software provider. So something to make sure you've got a workflow for. I've got a couple questions coming through. Ooh, somebody was asking about the slides. We can get the slides to you, and they'll also be available with the recording. Good question. And good. I'm glad these should be helpful for you. Communicate to the new provider if you make any changes after those reports were sent. So if I know this is common with bonuses, people will think, oh, we ran the last payroll, and then they send the reports over, or they give access, and then they cut somebody a bonus check or a commission check or something, and they forget to tell the new provider, oh wait, we had one more transaction. So if you're stopping in the old provider, stop in the old provider, or if something does change while things are in motion, don't forget to tell that to the new one. And then cutting ties with the old provider. I've had so many people tell me their clients like forget to go in and cancel. So maybe giving that little nudge of, hey, if we're moving on from the old one, we've got to close things out with them. So we don't have 2 payroll provider bills coming in. Okay, seeing if we've got some other questions. Just a couple of comments. This is helpful. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Next, let's talk about communication. Communication. If you want to really level up this experience for your clients, you want to think about the communication process. The first time I was having any remodeling work done in my home, I decided to hire professional painters. And I had 2 guys come to give me a quote on the job. The first day I came in, he was kind of quiet. He was polite, but he sort of went around on his own and did his measurements. I was waiting in my kitchen. He came back and asked a question about one of the closets, and then just kind of said, okay, I've got my measurements. I'll email you a quote and I can probably fit you in next week. And he left. The next guy, a different company, shows up, and it was an entirely different interaction. He had me go with him as he was doing the measurements. And while we were walking around, he was asking me a ton of questions about whether or not I'd had painting jobs done before, talking about his workflow, detailing like what time the staff would come, and telling me how they would move my furniture for me, and they would bring their own drop cloths and they'd wear things on their shoes. He told me how much time it was going to take and assured me that they'd be able to do that work in one day and put my furniture back so that I could, sleep in my own bed that night. He told me all of these details about the process. And I was so appreciative of that because it helped calm my anxieties around what this was going to look like. When he left, I had everything on a 1-page document, and I never thought he was talking down to me about this, right? Because on the surface, painting a wall is painting a wall, but he wanted to make sure I knew, hey, this is how the job is going to get done. This is what you can expect. These are the timelines. And for me, I felt really good about going into that process. And I think that's the experience we all want when we're making a change. So the same goes for payroll software. Think about your communication. How are you setting your client experience, and how are you setting those expectations? One best practice that I've seen in some firms is sharing a project plan with the client. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy or overload them with information. I think that something simple and concise can ease the anxiety and go a long way. It can set up, hey, this is what we're going to do as your accounting firm. This is what our payroll partner is going to do. And here's what we expect from you along the way. Not only that, think about whether or not your clients need help with how to communicate to their employees. You don't want to end up like in a situation with my friend where he had no idea that the payroll was getting switched, much less that he was going to have to log in on Christmas Eve and make some changes in a thing to get paid on time. Maybe you can give them some templates and some ideas of timelines of when they should email those employees or have meetings with their employees about this. Maybe some FAQs or a training if some of those people are going to need to log into that new tool or do anything to request time off going forward, that kind of stuff. Payroll partners might have some helpful materials for this, so definitely lean into them for it. And in the same vein, I really have appreciated when I work with teams that assign somebody to kind of lead up that project on the firm side and maybe ask the client, for someone to lead it up on theirs if it's not obvious, right? Because sometimes with software changes, you end up with a lot of cooks in the kitchen. You end up with a lot of people copied in on emails, and we tend to see that bystander effect, right? Where everybody in the email thread expects somebody else in the email thread to answer, and then we have bottlenecks, right? So that's something that can help you avoid those situations. Okay, I'm seeing some. Okay, it looks like Zach is sending a copy of the slides to you all if you want to look back on this later. There's also going to be a recording available. All right, next do partner with your providers. Remember that your payroll provider should be a partner. You and your payroll provider are working together to best serve your client. Whether or not they're in the software or not, your client and their employees are really who we are serving with payroll software. So lean into us to help guide you through this process. We've seen it. We've worked with firms like yours. We've worked with clients like yours, and we can help you navigate this and set your client up for success. Be sure that you kind of give us the same if you can, right? Be sure to stay on top of communications, anything from the provider that might require action to keep this successfully moving along so that the employees get paid the day that you want them to. And then, like we talked about before, keeping everybody up to date on any changes along the way can be helpful because, things happen. So we want to be ready for that. And don't skip the status update. So when we think about communication, and it comes to kind of giving a great client experience, when it comes to that, find out what your client's preferences are. I've had firms tell me that their clients don't want to be bothered. And then I've had small businesses tell me that they wish that their accountant was giving them more updates along the way, and they hate being in the dark. The best way to navigate this, in my opinion, is to ask. The same painter I was telling you about before was giving me text messages, not obnoxiously, but just a few throughout the day. Hey, we just started the second coat in this room. Hey, it looks like we're going to be wrapped up by 5 o'clock. So, you'll be back in order then. Whatever it is, I think if you can kind of let people know if that's a preference they have, it'll help. But if you do this, make sure you differentiate between things that are updates and things that require attention so that those attention emails don't get lost or texts or whatever communication you're using. You want to make sure that if, say, we need some information about a certain paycheck that the calculations look wrong on or whatever to successfully get a client up and running, that those things don't get missed out on. And then finally, this might be my favorite, celebrate the completion of a data migration. I never take this lightly. I realize that it is not the most fun to go through the process of switching data over, whether the payroll partner is doing it for you or you're involved in doing that yourself. No matter what, there's a lot of communication that has to happen. So be sure to celebrate it. And after the first payroll is successfully run, check in with your client and see how it went for them, for their employees. Check in with your team if they're involved with that. This will help reassure everyone involved that the old way is gone and the current way is going to be great. And if there were any hurdles along the way, this also gives you the opportunity to have those conversations. It can also open up some conversations for other ways that you can help your clients or your team be successful. Okay, there we have it. So to switch payroll providers, you should help your clients navigate the options, be a guide, do learn the market, and don't forget the workers. Plan ahead, do consider the timing, do know what information is needed, but don't overlook those smaller details and tasks and little things that can impact the process. And then finally, strive to deliver a great experience. Do set expectations, do partner with your providers, and don't skip the status updates. Communication is everything. I hope that this was helpful. I hope it gave you some food for thought and some helpful advice if you're switching payroll providers or performing that payroll remodel through a software switch. And again, I'm Valerie Heckman from OnPay. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, or if you're watching the recording, for watching this recording later. If you'd like to learn more about us at OnPay, you can head over to onpay.com/partners or email me and my team at partners@onpay.com. Thank you again. Thanks to the Earmark team, and stick around because we're about to play a quick message from Earmark about how to earn CPE for attending or watching this webinar. Thank you so much.
Today's webinar has ended. We hope you enjoyed it. To earn CPE for watching, download the free Earmark app. Scan the QR code on the screen to visit the download page. Open the app and create your account. Use a valid email address where you will receive CPE certificates. Then register for the course. You can search for it by tapping on the magnifying glass icon on the home screen and then entering the name of this webinar. If you're attending the live stream of this webinar, keep an eye out for an email letting you know when the quiz is available in the next few days. Pass the quiz to earn your CPE credits. Then tap the button to email yourself a CPE certificate. Stay tuned for more webinars from Earmark. We appreciate you joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.